Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, join me now in inviting to the stage the Honorable Prime Minister of Fiji, Mr. Sitiveni Rabuka, to deliver his keynote address and his messaging for the Pacific Dialogue.
The Honorable Prime Minister of Tonga, Honorable Ministers of the Pacific Nations, the Honorable Minister for Climate Change of Australia, good day. The Honorable Minister for Climate Change of New Zealand, kia ora. The Excellency, the COP28 Director General and Special Representative, the United Nations Director of Transparency, Your Excellencies, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Secretary General, for the very kind words this morning and good wishes for the deliberations the next 2 days. When I walked in to meet with the Minister for Climate Change of Australia, I said to him, we're looking for King Canute to stop the waves from taking away our islands. As you know, King Canute was king over about 6 kingdoms at the time, and his subjects felt that he could stop the waves. So they brought his throne to the beach and told him, King Canute the Great, you are great. You are the greatest. We ask that you stop the waves. Here in this room this morning and participating in the discussions over the next few hours are representatives from more than 6 nations. The whole world is now talking about stopping the climate change that is threatening so many neighboring islands of ours in the Pacific and other parts of the world. Ironic that many of you have come from cooler climates, or some of you have. Fiji acknowledges the success of our tourism industry, enjoying the number of tourists who run away from the cold to the warm Pacific. Now the Pacific is worried about overheating, global warming, rising sea levels, increasing tempestuous cyclones, all these things that are affecting us. In our pursuit to find solutions, we think of inviting knowledgeable and noble leaders like yourselves to come and think about this, talk about it, write reports and requests, and hopefully the whole world with us can work together towards our target that we have set for ourselves. On behalf of the government of Fiji, I would like to thank you all and thank the Secretariat and the Secretariat of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, and regional partners for supporting and helping Fiji co-host this high-level dialogue on climate change. I acknowledge and thank the incoming COP28 Director General and Special Representative, Ambassador Majid Al-Suwaidi, for taking the time to engage with our region. Welcome. Welcome to the big blue continent of the Pacific. You have a challenging task ahead of you, and Fiji is here to support you. We gather here for further critical discussions on the climate change issues that represent a real threat to our island nations, our people, and their way of life. All present here today are familiar with the phenomenon of global warming unleashed by greenhouse gas emissions and the resulting destructive impact on the environment. We apologize for having to provide air conditioning for our comfort this morning. The grim reality for us in the Pacific includes devastation from mighty storms, rising sea levels, deadly pollution, encroachment into village areas, degradation of land and damage to reefs, etc., etc., etc. One crucial figure concentrates the minds of regional leaders and all of us here today and the world. That figure is 1.5 degrees Celsius. That's the target for limiting global warming and maintaining it at a sustainable level. If we can reach 1.5 degrees, then our prospects for protecting everything that is precious to us in our island environment should be within reach. But doubts arise about the world's ability, even willingness, to go there. So for us, it's a question of constantly pushing for the 1.5 degrees in every way we can. Critical to this is cutting back on those greenhouse gas emissions, such as carbon dioxide, CO2, and methane. That in itself means grappling with the reality of fossil fuel based on carbon organisms and how important they are in the economic sense. Another uncomfortable reality is that producing and burning these fuels creates air pollution that harms health and generates toxic emissions that drive climate change. From the electricity that lights homes to the cars that people drive to work, modern life was built on fossil fuel like coal, oil, and natural gas. Those that have them are very rich nowadays. Those that buy them are crying out to reduce the production and the use of these. Here in the Pacific, we are motivated by the desire to adopt alternatives. It is a matter of survival. And those that have survived on these will probably try and block or stop that attempt of ours. We understand that for many countries in this is not an easy task, but we must still rely on them to help us, not only by moving away from fossil fuels, but also by doing more to cut emissions. And all this is urgent. Lack of action is reflective of another crisis, a moral one. As always, we remind the rest of the world that the conditions that led to global warming were not created by the islanders of the Pacific, and yet we bear the brunt of the hazards. We acknowledge as well that the impact of environmental changes is spreading widely. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, confirms that every region is highly vulnerable. It says there is a rapidly closing window of opportunity to achieve a secure future for all those affected. The science, in our view, leaves no room for debate. The large economies should move as quickly as possible towards phasing out the use of fossil fuels, embracing clean energy, and bringing down those emission levels. Alternatives include solar, green hydrogen, and biofuels made from plants and algae, hydroenergy, and wind power. This last natural resource served our ancestors very well during their ocean journeys. We in Fiji are looking at how we can reintroduce that into our local shipping and other uses. We place on record again our concern about the need for more investment funds to assist in protecting our food systems, agricultural productivity, and waste supplies, and water supplies, and the processing of waste that we put out every day, every week. We need support as well to build infrastructure to withstand the intensifying effects of rising sea levels, extreme weather, and the shifting dynamics of the ocean. I go further and call for a special fund dedicated to assisting our island nations. It would enable us to act swiftly, to adjust to and protect against the creeping climate menace. Early warning systems must be set up along with evacuation plans and community adaptation training. This crisis relentlessly eats away at our shores and our coastal areas. For us in Fiji, 6 villages have already been relocated. 42 are earmarked to be removed in the next 5 to 10 years. COP28 in November in the United Arab Emirates is the next opportunity for a global stock take on the problems that I have outlined. Surely this must be the moment for the world to take the corrective action that is urgently needed. I'm sure we can expect this COP to be different. I welcomed fairly recently comments by the incoming COP president, Sultan Al-Jaber. We must be brutally honest, he said, about the gaps that need to be filled, the root causes, and how we got to this place today. End of quote. Mr. Al-Jaber called out on all countries to update the plans and targets agreed at the landmark summit in 2015 that created the Paris Agreement. He also stressed the need to keep global heating below 1.5 degrees Celsius, saying it was the summit's North Star. Earlier this week, or late last week, I mentioned the North Star. As Julius Caesar said in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, I am as constant as the Northern Star. And that is a constant. Al-Jaber called on countries to update the plans and targets agreed at that landmark summit of 2015. I make the point that in many ways, we have to be more self-reliant. We can't blame others for problems that we have caused ourselves. Drainage problems that lead to flooding must be fixed by us. We are doing more to preserve and enlarge our mangrove forests that provide natural coastal protection. We moved away from cutting down mangrove trees to dry out copra. We moved away from that. So the mangroves are cheering up, they're growing again, but we want to grow more. Volunteers regularly clean up our shorelines littered with rubbish. The littering is spread widely, covering parts of our landscape into shameful eyesores. When a group of Japanese volunteers decided to pick up the rubbish that scarred the streets of Lautoka City's central business district, that to me was a national embarrassment. I thank those young people for what they had done, but it reflects badly on Fiji that they felt it necessary to come out and clean up our rubbish. A writer in yesterday's Sunday Times describing that incident put it succinctly. It is bad enough that we do have so much litter lying about in the first place, but when a group of visitors to our shores feels compelled to come and clean up after us, that surely is the message that is loud and very clear. If we failed to get their message, then I'm afraid we've lost ourselves in a vacuum of apathy and oblivion bordering on national neglect, what we are both doing and failing to do for our country. That's what that writer said in the paper. And most of us, I believe, would agree with him or her. Recently, I issued a public statement on an environmental issue that has generated much criticism in the region and internationally. I'm referring to the plans by Japan to discharge treated wastewater from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant into the Pacific Ocean. The plant was badly damaged by a tsunami in 2011. Controversy on the agenda of the Pacific Island Forum, it has created that controversy in my own forum here in the Pacific. It has confirmed and also created controversy in my own church groups here in Fiji. But I confirmed my support for a report by the International Atomic Energy Agency that the discharge of wastewater met internationally safety standards. And there will always be debate on whether that safety standard is acceptable to those that do not agree with it at the moment. I based my views on the science applied by the independent IAEA in its investigation and report. The agency is part of the United Nations system. The safety standards mentioned by them are reviewed annually by the United Nations General Assembly, based on estimates by the UN Scientific Committee on Effects of Atomic Radiation, UNSCEAR. The standards also include recommendations from independent, non-government group, the International Commission on Radiological Protection, ICRP. My decision to endorse the IAEA findings was taken by me as a Prime Minister's prerogative. I even have disagreement within my own cabinet, in my own party. Those who oppose the position I've taken are obviously entitled to their own viewpoints. However, I urge them to consider the science involved. One of my critics at the weekend appeared to be somehow connecting the wastewater discharge with the catalytic power of the nuclear bombs dropped in the Pacific as part of the weapon testing. That to me is more like fear-mongering. It's impossible to compare those nuclear tests with the careful discharge of treated wastewater from the Fukushima over a period of approximately 30 years. The material I've read says a commercial type power reactor simply cannot, under any circumstances, explode like a nuclear bomb. The fuel is not enriched beyond about 5%. A much higher enrichment is needed for explosive capacities. I'm going to share with you now, for this record, a few expert responses to the Fukushima plants. There are many more available, and many more will become available. The data I have read emphasizes that nuclear power stations do not produce greenhouse gases like the carbon dioxide and methane. The Society for Radiological Protection has 2,000 plus members and is the principal independent professional body in its area of expertise. Outside the USA, it's the largest organization of its kind in the world. It publishes the internationally respected Journal of Radiological Protection. It asserts that there should be no concern that the wastewater discharge operations could in any way affect human health or the environment. The IAEA verdict, it says, is highly justifiable. Professor Jim Smith of the School of Environment, Geography and Geosciences at the University of Portsmouth, UK, believes that the sewage discharge and ocean plastic pollution has greater ecological impacts than radiation. Professor Robin Grimes, Chair of Energy Material, Imperial College London, says the concentration of tritium, the remaining radionuclide in the water to be discharged, is very low and well below levels of any environmental concern. Professor Jerry Thomas, former professor of molecular pathology in the Imperial College of London, says the cleanup of the water has been closely monitored by relevant authorities inside and outside of Japan. According to Professor Thomas, the IAEA report clearly stated that the release of the stored contaminated water is consistent with the relevant and very conservative international standards. Finally, the water released would be a drop in the ocean in terms of volume of radioactivity. There was no evidence of that these extremely low levels of radioisotope have a detrimental health effect. This is what the scientists say. I'm not a scientist, so I believe until a better scientist come along. Professor Thomas added, other substances that we willingly ingest. Put your hand up if I mention something you ingest, such as alcohol, fatty and sugary foods, have a relatively large detrimental effect on our health, but are subject to much less stringent regulations and produce much less concern to the population. I didn't see any hand come up. These are constant references to the plans for the wastewater to be dumped in the Pacific. That creates the wrong impression. It is to be discharged into Japan's own backyard, 76,006 kilometers from Fiji, and it will probably slowly spread to us. Finally, I make the point that nuclear energy now provides about 10% of the world's electricity from about 440 power reactors in 32 nations. France gets up to 70% of its electricity from nuclear energy. Ukraine, Slovakia, Belgium, and Hungary get about half of theirs. Japan used to rely on nuclear power for more than 1/4 of its electricity, and is expected to return to somewhere close to that level. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your perseverance, listening to me justify my statement. But I'm here to welcome you. I'm here to welcome you to this discussion. high-level discussion on a common problem that we face, not only us in the Pacific, but the whole world is facing. I pray that we will honestly deliberate on the issues before us. And I also pray that the world will listen to us. Our very survival, first, we will be the first to go if we don't succeed. But go we will if the world does not succeed. So good luck in your deliberations. God bless you all.